30, probably at the lower end of that estimate, and they are in really rough shape. There's been some photos that have shown this week that are really troubling to see. Remains, there's been different numbers, 30 remains, possibly 40 remains, 30 remains is probably more realistic. So that's the big number there. In terms of the prisoners that Israel will release, there had been talk of up to 1,000. It now looks like it will be a slightly smaller number than that. But that's been a sticking point in past negotiations where the Palestinians were demanding that certain people be released and Israel didn't want to release them. It seems like they have some kind of informal agreement of who will be released. So I hope so. So that seems to not be such the sticking point this time.
We also spoke last time about previous presidents that tried to get to this point, to get this deal done. They were not successful. We have seen President Trump reach some success in all of this. What role has the United States really played in this agreement?
President Trump has played a huge role, as has his son-in-law. So I give credit to Jared for helping his father-in-law, because Jared knows how to. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, knows very well how to communicate with his father-in-law, and he has worked very closely with the president on this deal, as has Tony Blair. And so the president understands the importance. You've also seen that the president has been very upset by the pictures of starving children in Gaza, and he really wants the fighting to end. And on top of that, there's a report that he was very upset when Israel attacked Qatar about, what has it been now, 6 weeks or 2 months ago. He thought that was out of line on Israel's part. And so Netanyahu lost a little bit of standing in President Trump's eyes at that point. But to get to your specific question, President Trump's ability this time, or willingness this time, to really put his foot down on both sides and tell Netanyahu in no uncertain terms that he needs to come up with approval for this agreement and stop attacking the civilians if there is an agreement. And then telling Hamas, you'd better sign this agreement or I'm going to tell Bibi that he can do whatever he wants and go in and destroy the rest of Gaza. That clearly also got Hamas's strong attention, as it should have. So President Trump, deserves a lot of the credit for coming around and really pressuring both sides to work on this in good faith and come up with a ceasefire so that we can now move to the next phase.
And speaking of, the first phase that we're really still in, do you think this will lead to a lasting peace agreement there? And why or why not, in your opinion?
Yeah, so a lasting peace would be peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And interestingly, one thing that seems to have changed is President Trump now agrees there has to be a Palestinian state. Some of his ideas earlier in this term of figuring out a way to have the Gazans part of another country or something, that's not workable.
So Shay, I want to interrupt you. And
I'm sorry?
I hate to interrupt you. We are following some breaking news, and we do want to get to it inside the Dirksen Federal Courthouse right now. I said earlier we would be hearing from Mayor Brandon Johnson. As you know, the state and city, they're suing over this troop deployment. Let's listen in.
A very strong case in close partnership with the Attorney General and, of course, the Governor's office. We said that this deployment had nothing to do with public safety. We said that this has nothing to do with immigration. This is purely political. And now the federal government is arguing the same thing. They claim this is not about crime, while at the same time the president says this is only about crime. They cannot get their story straight. They can't get their story straight because the truth is they are being sent here to occupy our city. 1 month that they've been here, the federal immigration agents have shot and killed an unarmed father in Franklin Park and then lied about the circumstances of his death. They zip-tied small children and elderly women in the middle of the night in the South Shore community on the south side of Chicago. They shot a woman 5 times. They tear-gassed protesters, reporters, and Chicago police officers. They shot a minister in the face with pepper balls. They caused a car accident and put a resident in a chokehold in East Garfield Park. deployed chemical agents on a busy residential street near an elementary school and grocery store, forcing parents to run for cover with their 2-year-old child. They've marched through downtown displaying high-grade automatic weapons while arresting families because of how they look. They arrested a city council member for asking to see a warrant. Now they are calling for backup. The good news is that because our court challenge and because the government has restricted the orders for their deployment significantly. But that's what I mean when we say the courts are still a check. Maybe our only check. Maybe our only check on this out-of-control administration. Again, the government has restricted its orders for their deployment, and they've done it significantly. I'm here because we are part of this lawsuit. I'm charged with keeping our city safe, and I wanted to show my respect for the process by coming in person today. This is about the respect for the rule of law and our hope that it can and will defend our democracy. With that, I'll take questions. Well, it does, and I'll just highlight again, because of the work that we have done in this city, in this state, we've called out this president as a double-minded individual and has been unstable in all of his ways. First of all, he said this was about crime. Then he said it was about immigration. We knew he was lying, and we called him out about that. And now he's saying that it has nothing to do with crime. It has nothing to do with immigration. And then they won't respect the court enough and the rule of law to be able to provide very specific parameters and a frame for why they even want to be here. And I believe that the court and the judge today asked, I believe, very pointed questions so that the federal government could offer up some perspective, and they've even failed to do that. So this is absolutely about what we've said it has always been. It's about invoking chaos and fomenting chaos and creating divisions within our communities and trampling on our democracy. And so again, our hope is that the court demonstrates in this moment as the only potential place where a check and a balance could be offered up to this unhinged and reckless administration. Is that all? Oh. Well, I mean, what I can say is that, there's clear evidence of why this particular judge was nominated. And I think the level of questioning is spot on. Quite frankly, if I'm being totally honest here, it was brilliant of how she has dissected this case and has clearly worked and done her homework to challenge the federal government to be able to offer up a very simple, basic explanation for this suggestion. In terms of, how I am assessing this moment, look, I actually think it's already a win that the federal government, the Trump administration, has finally told the truth. Now, we had to force them to tell the truth, that this is not about immigration, that it's not about crime. And we've been saying that repeatedly. And so at the very least, the fact that the federal government has narrowed its scope, I see that as a movement in the right direction, favorably. All right? Thank you all. Oh. Well, I mean, again, I believe that the level of questioning that came from the bench today is why we need real checks and balances in government. And I think what stood out for me today was can the president just simply make a declaration without substantial and significant review? And I believe the judge today really pressed on that. But also what stuck out was the fact that you literally had the President of the United States of America displaying his instability. The fact that the scope of this deployment has narrowed significantly, as well as the fact that the federal government has clearly stated that this is not about crime, it's not about safety, and it's not about immigration. So then the question I believe that has come forward is then what is the impetus behind, this deployment? Well, I mean, it's clear that this administration has demonstrated that it's unwilling to work within the parameters of the Constitution. I believe that should be a concern for all of America, that at a time in which this administration has made it very clear that its sole intent is to be an authoritarian government versus a democracy, that I believe that we all should be concerned about that. Thank you all very much.
So you heard from Mayor Brandon Johnson there. Of course, the city is part of this lawsuit as well as the state. I want to kind of bring you up to speed of what's happening inside the courtroom. There was a 5-minute break. The judge did say when they came back, closing arguments would then begin. It had left off on the plaintiff, representing obviously the city and also the state, giving their narrative of why the National Guard shouldn't be brought here. And then the judge returned back to the courtroom at 1:17, and now the defendants are giving their rebuttal in this. But after that, it sounds like the judge says she is done with questions, and we may actually have a result of what has transpired inside of April Perry's courtroom today. She is the judge. I kind of want to button up what Brandon Johnson said there, some of his direct quotes about what has happened in the city of Chicago with ICE agents coming here and now this National Guard deployment. He said it was, quote, purely political. And then he went down the list of all the incidents that have happened across the city of Chicago since ICE was deployed for Operation Midway Blitz. He talked about ICE shot and killed an unarmed father. That was in Franklin Park. He mentioned the South Shore raid. He mentioned the woman that was shot over the weekend in Brighton Park, shot 5 times. He mentioned protesters and journalists and a pastor being hit with pepper balls. So he's basically saying, at this point that he feels like the judge understood the city and also the state's arguments that the National Guard should not be deployed here. And so he also said this, that the federal government has been calling for backup for ICE agents, and maybe the courts is the only check on this out of control administration. That is a direct quote from Mayor Brandon Johnson. Of course, we are continuing to follow all of this, and we will definitely bring you the update on exactly what happens inside that courtroom when we have the judge ruling. We will bring it to you right here on Fox32Chicago.com, Fox Local, and also we'll cut in live into our broadcast. Stay with us. We have much more right after this break. Welcome back. Of course, we are following this hearing that is going on right now at Dirksen Federal Courthouse, where we know the city of Chicago and also the state of Illinois has brought a 69-page complaint against essentially the Trump administration. I'm looking at that complaint right now over the issue of the National Guard being deployed in the state of Illinois and specifically to the Chicagoland area. Rebuttal is going on in the courthouse right now. And in fact, the plaintiff, the state, the city, is speaking, and this is what they've said so far. Just as of now, they're talking about the 10th Amendment has been brought into question, and really, you know, what is the legalities for the Trump administration to be able to bring in the National Guard. After that, we know that the judge has said that she has no more questions. So after this rebuttal, we should have some type of answer from the judge on what will happen next in this case. And when that happens, we will bring it to you right here live. Of course, we're watching the podium. We just heard from Mayor Brandon Johnson speaking on this issue, saying that he thought the judge did a great job of asking clear and concise questions and not getting clear and concise answers from the defendants in this case. So we will be watching this. We have Anita Blanton inside that courtroom. As soon as this all comes down, she'll go right in front of that microphone and talk about what has happened. This has been going on since 11 o'clock this morning, so a few hours now. And of course, we will continue to watch how this unfolds. We do want to continue on with some other news. If this does happen, though, we will break in. But first, we want to talk about this. Nano Nuclear Energy just announced a deal with the Office of Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker to boost nuclear production right here in our state. Nano Nuclear Energy will receive $6.8 million to establish its new manufacturing and research development facility right here in the state. And we want to bring in J.U., who is the founder and president of Nano Nuclear Energy. For those who don't know, explain for us, first of all, thank you for being with us, and then explain for us what Nano Nuclear Energy is and how it actually works.
Yeah, Nano Nuclear Energy is a vertically integrated advanced microreactor company. And what that means is 20 megawatts or less. So what we're doing here is we're building our flagship Kronos MMR with the University of Illinois. So on its campus, we're going to begin drilling actually this month. We're going to take that data and then submit a construction application with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Q1 of next year, roughly. And, you know, we'll wait around for the NRC to approve that in hopefully a year and a half. And then at that point, we'll be pouring concrete and steel. So we'll be partnered with the university, and then the state sees this and the governor sees this. And we're creating 50 high-paying jobs at Illinois. We bought our facility in Oak Brook recently. So we're very excited about supporting Illinois right now.
Now, I know you have a Wall Street background. Can you explain how that has helped really build the foundation for this company?
Yeah, so we opted out to take Nano Nuclear public early on. And with that, we captured the enthusiasm of Wall Street. You see the rise of AI data centers right now. And that is a big price point for a lot of these analysts and Wall Street people. So they're all now pouring into this, and they know that with nuclear energy, especially the technology that Nano's creating, this is a way for them to be involved in the sector and the rise of this boon in AI.
You know, a lot of people, when they hear nuclear, the first thing they think of is obviously nuclear bombs. Tell us about nuclear and really the positives about nuclear.
Yeah, the positives is per gigawatt hour, I think nuclear is safer than wind and solar. So if we think about it, nuclear was a gift given to us, I would say, but instead we used it from inception for destruction. But it really is here to help bring carbon-free energy to the world. And Nano is just playing its part with building its advanced new technologies that we call walk-away safe. We use no liquid coolant, so things can't just melt down. We use fuel that's so advanced that, you know, if you shoot a missile at it, it'll just passively cool. It's not going to continue to explode. So these are the new technologies that are happening, especially in the U.S., and we're here to help build back the U.S. infrastructure in that.
Talk about portable micro reactors. What is that, and then how does it actually work?
Yeah, so we could we could transport it traditionally through road, train, ships, and it could be brought to, for example, disaster relief areas where hurricanes or storms hit, where traditionally we've been using diesel generators. So we could essentially replace that. The military is very active around this. Recently, we won an award from the Air Force Innovation Unit with the closest military base to DC. That we're doing a feasibility study there. So helping the military, helping even northern communities in Canada. There's several hundreds of them, and they have all diesel generators. So if we're able to go up there and kind of disrupt that and bring carbon-free energy, also lasting energy with safe and long-term production, I think that's key.
So let's talk about, I know you mentioned the jobs coming to the state of Illinois. I think you said 50 jobs. What kind of jobs are those, and exactly what will those people be doing at this facility? What will happen there?
Sure. So this is our engineering and development facility. So we will have a big part of that as research. So we're going to be assembling components of our reactor. And then these 50 jobs, and that's minimum 50 jobs. We actually expect to be hiring hundreds of jobs eventually. But these are high paying jobs in engineering. So nuclear engineering in different parts, radiation safety, quality control, mechanical engineers. So we already have met even half of that. We've already hired about 24 people already in Illinois, and we're going to continue to hire to meet the threshold where we promised to state that. So this is a bare minimum is 50. We're looking to hire actually hundreds.
And that's what we'd like to hear, more jobs coming to the state of Illinois. J.U., we thank you so much for your time today and coming on our newscast.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Okay, I do want to bring people up to speed. Of course, we're watching for this ruling and this hearing that it's unfolding right now about the legalities of the National Guard being deployed here to the state of Illinois. And so we've heard a rebuttal. There's been back and forth in the courtroom after it went to break. And we know the judge is in there right now, and the defendants in this case, they're up now really trying to state their claims of why the National Guard should be here. And I just want to read you some of what has transpired. We just got this text message from our reporter who's in that courtroom. The first one came to us at 1:28, and then we have one that just came at 1:30. And I want to read you some of what was said. So the defense is saying we submitted evidence of violence against personnel, coordinated, serious. They mentioned the incident that happened in Brighton Park, where they're claiming that the ICE agents were boxed in and rammed. They're talking about unusual threats to personnel and property. Of course, we know that a gang member out there had put basically a bounty over the head of Gregory Bavino. They're talking about that. They're talking about the president convened for safety and law enforcement and president's judgment unreviewable. Even if there is some level of review, Ninth Circuit found highly differential plaintiffs' claims meritless and premature. So right now, they're trying to state their claim about the National Guard, and they went on to say that the plaintiffs, that being the state and also the city, they have not established irreparable injury. How? Speculative. It's only 300 Illinois Guard called out. Self-inflicted injury when the governor could call Title 32, and it's going on and on. So as of right now, it sounds like what you're hearing there is on the side of the Trump administration. The government is trying to really outline why the National Guard should be here in the first place. And earlier, as we were kind of transcribing what's going on inside the courtroom, the judge, April Perry, had a lot of questions asking for straight up evidence. Give me the proof of why really that the president should be able to invoke his rights to have the National Guard here. Normally, we know, legally speaking, the Guard would call in the National Guard. So again, I'm sorry, not the Guard. The governor would be calling in the National Guard. So again, we will watch this closely. And as soon as we have the results from inside that courtroom, we will bring it to you right here on our streaming platform and, of course, online as well. We do want to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. All right, so we are watching what plays out at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. Again, I do want to bring you up to speed. If I look over, it's not that I'm being rude. I'm just watching all of these updates come in via text message from our reporter that's inside the courtroom. At one point, the judge called for everyone to then come back at 4:30, roughly 5 o'clock. But now we're hearing the plaintiffs in this case, that being the state and the city, that's who they're representing. They're back up. That person speaking will have about 7 minutes to speak. And then it sounds like we may have a quick, some sort of a break here. And then the judge will then come back later on throughout the afternoon. Of course, we are following this. We know political reporter Pierre Schutz at some point throughout the streaming show will join me. And we will sort through all of the details that we've learned in the last hours, because this has been going on for quite some time. The hearing started at 11. Here it is, 1:36. We've heard from Mayor Brandon Johnson, who took that podium. And if they do go on a break, we expect others to possibly go to that podium as well. You can see the media staging right there, waiting for all of this to unfold. A legal battle going on about the National Guard being deployed right here in the state of Illinois, specifically in the Chicagoland area. I want to talk about some other legal news that is going on right now. There's been 2 new civil lawsuits that have been filed claiming sexual assault of female passengers on American Airlines and United Airlines. And Daisy Ayon is with us. She's an attorney and a partner at Romanucci and Blandon. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So tell us about these 2 lawsuits and really give us the details of what is being alleged here.
Sure. You know, we actually represent right now 3 different clients who have filed a civil lawsuit against American Airlines and United Airlines. All of them have been victims of sexual abuse. The 2 most recent ones involve two of our clients, women, who were sexually assaulted while they were on board the flight. And what's important about these lawsuits is that this is something that is systemic. It's something that has been going on for a long time. Since 2018, the FBI actually had warned the airlines that sexual abuse during flights is a problem that has to be addressed, and airlines just simply haven't taken the steps necessary to ensure the safety of the passengers. In our particular case, we have a couple of different allegations. One of our complaints alleges that our client, she was a female client, she came onto the flight, she was given the middle seat, and while she was doing her thing, there was a passenger sitting next to her who boarded the plane, and he was already visibly intoxicated when he got on board. Later, he started assaulting her, just initially by touching her, by trying to have a conversation with her, really inappropriate questions. And then that continued to escalate to where our client was sexually assaulted, and he started to touch her private areas, her genitals. The airlines, while this was happening, didn't do anything. No one on the flight did anything to help our client. And later, this particular individual actually pleaded no contest to the criminal allegations. But the reason incidents like these are happening is because the airlines are not allowing passengers to move while they're on flight, or in some circumstances, individuals start drinking at the airport and then they get on the flight and then they continue to be served alcohol. And so what we're seeing in these claims is that there's a real lack of accountability. There are no guardrails in place to make sure that women are protected. And a lot of women are suffering when they get on the flight. They're thinking that they're going to be safe. And in fact, they're in for a rude awakening because these incidents of sexual assault keep happening again and again.
When it comes to these sexual assaults, and you said that, you know, this client, one of the clients that you just mentioned there, this person was intoxicated. Were police notified right away when the plane landed? Was there police there to get on board and investigate? Did you find any of that out as these clients were telling you their stories?
It varies by client, and the facts are a little bit different. In one of the cases, our client made a police report. It's important to note that local police don't have any jurisdiction when it comes to airplanes. So typically what has to happen is that federal authorities have to get involved. And so our clients, in all of the cases, did make a police report. One individual was actually convicted. In the first claim that we filed against American Airlines back in April of this year, that individual had actually, the American Airlines had received complaints from another passenger saying, hey, this individual sexually assaulted me. So American Airlines knew that, and then they continued to allow him to board the flights. And sure enough, he went on to assault our client, who was the second victim. Then he continued to be allowed to board the flights, even though our client had already made a report. And then he went on to assault a third person. That particular case did not involve alcohol, but it did involve the airlines knowing that there are issues with male passengers sexually assaulting females and not taking any steps to address that conduct. In the two most recent complaints that we filed, both of our clients actually reported this to the airlines when it happened, and then later to the authorities. The individual that I was mentioning before, who was clearly visibly intoxicated, the guards actually said, we can smell alcohol because it's so readily apparent. And he went on to have criminal charges and pleaded no contest to that.
What have you heard in a response from the airlines in regards to your three clients? Have they given any indication of anything that they plan to change? I'm guessing in your lawsuits, you do have some declarations of things that you want to see changed for all female passengers.
Right. We haven't heard anything from American Airlines. They have given the generic, there is pending litigation and we don't comment on that in some of the cases, but we haven't heard anything from them. But it's important to note that this is not the first time that they have been sued. They have been sued. Typically, what we have seen is that American and other airlines who have been sued for similar incidents in the past, they settle those claims under confidentiality. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And the conduct is so egregious because the airlines, as I mentioned previously, they have known since 2018 that the number of sexual assaults on board flights is increasing, and they're not doing anything. And to your point, there are a number of things that we believe the airlines should do immediately to try to protect passengers, such as allowing passengers to change seats if they feel uncomfortable, making sure that there's someone on board who is conducting assessments to see if someone on board needs help. We want to make sure that the airline employees have proper training on how to address incidents of sexual assault. We want to see changes as to how they handle individuals who are already drunk when they're arriving at the gate. And we believe that it's really important to not allow those individuals to board the flight, and when they're on the flight, to make sure that you're not serving them additional alcohol, just enabling the situation to get worse and putting passengers in danger.
What happens next? You're representing three women. I'm guessing they're all women in this case. What happens next in terms of the lawsuits?
Sure. We're very early in the process of the lawsuits. So now, from a technical side, we are going to be exchanging what's called written discovery, which is a series of questionnaires that both sides exchange. After that, we're going to get to do some depositions. This is testimony that our clients and the airlines are going to give, where we get to ask questions about how long have they known? Why were no guardrails in place? So that's the process. And eventually, although litigation is a very slow process, eventually we hope to bring these cases to trial. And by doing so, we're hoping that other women will come forward and tell their story, because it's really important. It doesn't seem, there's no requirement currently in the law that requires the airlines to report incidents of sexual assault. So what has been happening is that all of this information is very contained, and it doesn't get shared with the public. So when the public and when individuals are purchasing tickets, they don't know what risks they're facing. And so we want to make sure that passengers have the information that they need in order to be safe. And it's incumbent upon the airlines who are inviting all of these individuals to come and do business with them to make sure that they're sharing information so that passengers know the risk and are informed, and they have the tools to protect themselves.
And we know oftentimes in depositions and also trials, so much information comes out, maybe even details that you didn't know and find out in your discovery. So this will be interesting to see how this moves forward. And of course, we plan to talk to you again. Attorney Ayoun, thank you so much for your time today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
All right. It's been a pleasure. I want to go back to we are eyeing the Dirksen Federal Courthouse right now. And we do know the judge did go on a break. Everyone will return back at 4:30 this afternoon. And the last comments that were made are coming essentially from the city of Chicago and the state, the plaintiffs in this case, asking the questions about the troops being here and really saying, I'll actually give you what was said that we take that very serious, that the notion that law enforcement is at risk. Most of our evidence comes from law enforcement. See how that's being perceived. That's irreparable harm. Troops are already here and will be at the courthouse tomorrow. That's irreparable harm. Ask that you grant injunction in support of terms. We want to bring in Anita Blanton, who's been in that court room since around 11 this morning. Anita, we're looking at, the conversations that are happening inside the courtroom, getting your text messages. We can't really see, the expressions there. It seems like the judge a little bit frustrated at times with the defendants in this case. Can you speak to the fact of what the judge's demeanor was like? Because she asked a lot of questions, asking for concrete proof of what the defendants are saying that, Chicago is violent, saying the National Guard troops should be here.
Yeah, she was definitely frustrated by many things. She came in right at about 11:08 this morning, and she said she had a list of questions. Some things trying to drill down the definition of certain things, like what is a rebellion, because that's, of course, a part of the argument in this case. Again, the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago versus Donald J. Trump and his administration, also there, the Secretary of the Army. So she wanted to know what exactly is a rebellion. What does that mean? Is what we're seeing in Broadview, is what we saw this past weekend at 39th and Kedzie, is that a part of a rebellion, or are we seeing something different? What is the definition of certain things? She began to ask. She had a lot of great concern when it comes to the limits of powers. That came up multiple times in terms of the request that the plaintiffs are making as to this injunction. Okay, does it mean that the federal troops or the National Guard would just be around the courthouse? Does it mean that they're allowed to arrest people? Does it mean different things? So she wanted to know, what is the scope? What is the definition? Obviously, the defendants here are asking for things to be a little bit more broad than it seems she's comfortable with. So she's asking for the exact definition of certain things that they're asking for. They began to cite things that are happening in Oregon, things that are happening in California, and asking, okay, does what we're seeing there, for instance, the Trump administration says, well, when we saw that there was an issue in LA, in their opinion, an issue in LA, because of course the mayor in LA, the governor there in California say there really wasn't an issue to bring in the Guard. But in their opinion, when we saw an issue in LA, we brought in the National Guard. They essentially held the line around federal buildings. And when we began to see that things were calming down, okay, then we began to de-escalate. We began to bring some of those guards out of that situation. And they're saying that the same thing could happen here. But again, it definitely seemed like she was very frustrated, not only by a lack of definition for multiple things, but also about the fact that so much of this has played out online. She began to cite the fact that there were so many social media posts, so many statements that were made in public before anyone got into a courtroom. And she says, okay, well, how do I separate what's been made public already versus what privately you sent me. And apparently there were documents being sent to the judge and between these different parties up until about midnight. In fact, she even said some things came in this morning. So there's been a steady flow, a steady exchange of information between these two councils. And she's saying, okay, well, you're sending all of these things to me, and they may be technically right by the letter of the law, but what I'm hearing from the people in these documents is vastly different from what you're sending me. So how can I take this and not include that in my judgment? So several different things that she kind of went over that were puzzling to her. As she said, that she had sheets of questions that she was going over. Even the question of, okay, well, are you asking the National Guard to go to Broadview, which we've already seen them in Broadview today, and that has been kind of the crux of where we've seen protests over the last several weeks, over about the last month, where we've seen them go to Broadview on Friday after Friday after Friday. The protesters saying they would be there for 45 days. All right, are you asking people, the National Guard, to go to Broadview, and that's the extent of where they're supposed to go? Or do they have free reign and we could see them anywhere on Chicago streets? She had plenty of questions, and I gotta say, there weren't a whole lot of very specific answers, and I think that frustrated her that much more because it wasn't helping her to kind of narrow down an answer for anyone at this time. So like you said, we're adjourned until 4:30. She's giving the plaintiffs here and the defendants some time to kind of rework some of their documents and submit them back to her. And one of the attorneys for the administration even said he has a flight at 6 o'clock, and she said, well, in her words, I don't want to get in your business, but I'm not sure if you're going to be able to get to O'Hare. So I'm not sure how long we're going to be here today, but it's very clear that she wasn't clear on what exactly they want from her, because she wanted to be narrow in scope, and she wasn't seeing that in the documents, and she also wasn't willing to kind of give free will. Multiple times when she was asking the administration's counsel questions, they referred back to, well, the president has great deference. In the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, in the Ninth Circuit, they gave him great deference. They gave him great deference. They kept saying that, but on the other hand, the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, their attorneys coming from Kwame Raoul's office, the Attorney General, they're saying, listen, yes, of course the president has extended powers, but that doesn't mean there's no such thing as checks and balances. And what they're asking for is that the judicial system would be a check to the powers that be. Again, another frustration was the fact that the Guard is already here and they're having this conversation. The Guard is already at Broadview and they're having this conversation. And there's a question of, okay, well, if she rules against them, where does the Guard go? Do they go home? Usually they're here for like a 60-day deployment. What happens if she rules against them? Do they just go home, or does it change the scope of what they're doing? Lots of questions, not a whole lot of answers just yet. And again, we are adjourned at this moment until about 4:30. She says she may be back at 4:30, and it may be 5 by the time she's actually back in the courtroom. But we don't want to be late for her because hopefully we'll get some type of judgment today. They also, let me also say this. They also talked about the fact that while we were sitting in there, there were several other judgments that were made. Keep in mind, this has been a week of several different lawsuits that have all been pretty high profile. There was a group of journalists and immigration rights advocates who were suing for an injunction. And so we were hearing more about that just as we were in there, that some of the things have been won in their favor in terms of how federal agents can interact with protesters in these situations over and over again. What is their scope when they're out there? And that's just the federal agents. Again, that's before we get to the issue of the National Guard. So lots of things that they're still trying to work out. Some things that immigration rights advocates are saying is a win this week, and one thing that is a big question mark right now that we're still waiting on the judge to decide. But I'll send it back to you for now. If you have a question, let me know.
I will let you Anita, and I do. One thing that was interesting that unfolded inside the courthouse while you were in the courtroom, we actually heard from Lovie and Lovie. They are representing people that are saying, hey, what about our First Amendment rights here? Representing protesters, journalists, and even a pastor that was pelted by a pepper ball there. And it was interesting because you were in the courtroom when the judge was asking the defendants in this case, give me more, give me some concrete evidence. And it was interesting because they didn't even know, at least they alleged that they did not know anything about that particular case. And I do want to read you something that you actually sent us back here at the studio. The judge asked this question: does the president have the authority to deploy the National Guard at any time for any threat? That is really the big scope here. Is we are kind of at a pivotal moment here. They didn't give concrete answers. So it sounds like the judge thinks that that is what they're trying to do. What do you make of that?
Well, and she, when you say any threat, she also brought up the fact that that authorities, anyone in public service right now, has been receiving threats. So is it the actual threat? Is it the actual danger? Is it the actual event that's happened? Or are you trying to prevent something? Because in the letter of the law, it talks about executing the president not being able to execute the laws, and that's why you need the National Guard. But in her words, it seems like they're trying to prevent crime and not necessarily solve crime. And there's a big difference between those two things. So when you talk about threats being made, she even mentioned the fact that 10 minutes after she took this case, she started receiving threats. I've been very clear today that we have barricades up around the whole courthouse. And of course, there was this conversation about whether the Guard would be here even as early as tomorrow, to which she addressed that. Again, conversation was being had. We saw a statement that came out from the Chief Justice here that said, I never requested the National Guard. So there are many different levels in terms of, okay, what is the threat, or what is the solution to the problem, or what actually is the problem that she was kind of trying to get to the heart of, and it just didn't seem like there were a whole lot of concrete answers at the time. Again, they've got a few hours to maybe come back with a little bit more of an argument, but as we were sitting in there, they just didn't have a whole lot of concrete answers for her.
I want to ask you about this in particular, Anita. I have the lawsuit in my hand right now, 69 pages, a decent amount of articles, statements actually made by the president himself of why the National Guard should be brought into the state of Illinois, specifically Chicagoland area is a part of this. Did any of this come up when you were sitting inside the courtroom this morning?
Yeah, again, she mentioned the fact that so many statements had been made outside of the courtroom, and whether she should take those into account, or how could she not take those into account versus what was actually sent to her in documents. Now, of course, the Trump administration believes that Operation Midway Blitz has been pretty successful, that they were able to apprehend already in just the past month about 1,000 people suspected to be in the country illegally. But we also know that there were children and U.S. citizens that were caught up in those raids. So what they're saying is that, listen, we're trying to do this operation to safeguard the city. Even the governor of Texas, in sending the Texas National Guard troops, about 400 of them here to this area, saying they're trying to safeguard these ICE agents as they're trying to do this job of making the city safer, of making the state safer. But of course, there are other things that are happening in that time frame. One of the other things that got brought up was some of the clashes that have happened between the agents as they're trying to do their duty and the protesters that they have encountered. And there was a conversation about, or comments made about, a beard being pulled, or projectiles being thrown at the officers. But I'll tell you, the judge actually raised the point, okay, what is the catalyst? Like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, essentially? So if you've had protests at this particular facility in Broadview for many years, we've been saying that there were some protesters that come out there weekly and they pray, and that's been happening for many years before all of this kind of began to start. So she's saying, if the opinion is that we've had protesters for years, CBP shows up, They're not trained in de-escalation, therefore they have tense interaction with the protesters. The protesters respond in kind, then who's really at fault? Is it the people who came in and began agitation? Who's the agitator? So she asked some questions like that back, and again, didn't really hear a whole lot in terms of, well, which is it? And I think she was frustrated by the fact that she wasn't getting those concrete answers in return, but certainly frustrated by the amount of conversation that's happened outside of the walls of that courtroom, and whether she's just supposed to take what's written on a piece of paper, which essentially just says over and over, give the president deference, versus what she's heard that's not jiving. The two, she says, are not in line.
Right. Sounds like she hasn't heard true facts and reason for the National Guard to be here. You did mention something that I want to go back to. You mentioned the children that were zip tied. That was in that raid that happened in South Shore, where 37 people were indeed arrested. And we heard from Brandon Johnson, who was just kind of in the area where you're standing, running us through, all of the bad things that have happened since ICE agents have gotten on the ground here in the Chicagoland area. We heard from Brandon Johnson. Have you seen any other local leaders, maybe from Chicago or from the state, in that courtroom today?
Not in the courtroom. The only person who was readily identifiable was Attorney General Kwame Raoul. And again, he's not the person who is making the argument today. That is Attorney Wells. So outside of that, I know that I text our photographer down here, Dee Gresham, asking him about what was happening down here. He did say that the mayor was stepping to the mic, but we haven't seen any of them in the courtroom today. It's mainly been members of the media, and that's a long list of people who are with the media. There's been some law students who are in the courtroom because, of course, this would be the type of case you'd want to study. There is so much to it. And then there are those who are arguing their cases on either side. But definitely, we haven't seen any more high-profile officials that have been in there today.
It is going to resume, Anita, in a little more than 2 hours and just under 30 minutes. What do you expect to happen there? Do you think that this will be a situation where, I know the judge is allowing the plaintiffs to kind of get their paperwork together. Do you think this is a situation that will be finalized by end of business today, based on what the judge has said?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I wish and that even came up. There was a particular question that the judge asked, and the defendant said, well, that's a good question. And she said, I know, that's why I asked it. But that is a good question that you're asking. And I'm not really sure whether they're going to get a decision. I would think, yes, they'll have some type of decision, but obviously it kind of depends on what kind of paperwork they present come 4:30 or 5 o'clock. Not sure what they could add to their argument between now and then, but who knows what could be added. It's very certain on either side. No one is arguing whether there have been some tense collisions. No one is arguing whether there is, the possibility that maybe more help is needed for whomever is on the ground. But I'll tell you, a part of the plaintiff's argument here, the state and the city's argument here, is that they got a lot of their information from law enforcement officers. Obviously, one of the big things that we have seen from the beginning of the week, if you really think about how we got to this point, one of the major press conferences, and there were a list of press conferences on Monday. We heard from the mayor first thing in the morning about ice-free zones. We heard from the Superintendent Snelling by 1 p.m. And then we heard from the governor and Cook County President, Commissioner Preckwinkle. We heard from so many people on Monday, but when we heard from Superintendent Snelling, it really was about this idea of, okay, what are the limits of our local law enforcement? Where do the federal agents step in? What is holding back? Was there an order to stand down or not? Which Superintendent Snelling says, no, there was no order, but there could have been a miscommunication. So whenever you're dealing with like state, local, and federal authorities, well, maybe there are some miscommunications, but at the same time, he says there was no order to stand down. But from the federal government standpoint, it's okay, if you have your limits, and let me go to what Superintendent Snelling quoted. He quoted the Trust Act And that restricts local law enforcement and jails from assisting federal immigration agents in immigration enforcement without a judicial warrant. And it says thereby limiting their collaboration in detaining immigrants solely for deportation purposes. He also referenced the Welcoming City Ordinance, which limits cooperation with federal immigration enforcement to protect the rights and safety of immigrants and ensure access to city services. And he said they are walking a fine line. So if the federal government looks at it as, if you are having a tough time walking this fine line, well, we're going to bring in people who can for sure act on these federal agents' behalf. And they're not worried about the Welcoming City Ordinance. They're not worried about the Trust Act. It is their sworn duty to follow the president's orders. And maybe that's another aspect of it that kind of gets lost in all of this. And that's that these National Guard troops, they're just like me and you. You know, they work regular jobs, but these are people who also sign up to serve at the president's behest. So when they get an order, that's all they're doing. They are going to where they are ordered to go. They leave their jobs and they come to where they've been ordered to go. And in particular, this particular guard from Texas, they are used to immigration enforcement. There is a pretty controversial but a long-term Operation Lone Star that they have been a part of for the last 4 years, and that's down at the country's border with Mexico. So many of them have been a part of that over the last 4 years before coming here. So yes, Governor Abbott says, hey, if you need help in Illinois, I'm sending them. But another aspect that the Governor Pritzker that came up today, that, you know, they say that the president, well, he's still open to the idea that Governor Pritzker, even though these National Guard troops right now are here on what's called a Title 10 order, it could, and that means it comes from the president, that they could be moved to a Title 32 order. And the Title 32 order would then be under Governor Pritzker. And then it would require, it would get federal funds, not require, but it would get some assistance from federal funds. They said that has been open the entire time, but Governor Pritzker didn't want it. Of course, our local law enforcement, our state, you saw just last week in Broadview that there was a lot of ISP there after Broadview police said, yeah, we need some help. They only have about 25 officers there on that particular department. So when they asked for help, ISP came in full force. And from what the state attorney said, in the communication between ICE and ISP, it seemed like that was enough. They felt like that tamped things down enough that they really did not need the National Guard. So there is this, another one of the questions from the judge that kept coming back up was, what's regular forces? Is that the military? Is that ISP? Is that CPD? Is that Broadview Police? Like, what is regular forces, and what is it that they can't do that now you need the military for? Lots of questions again that came up today that are all being sifted through, and we'll just see. I wish I had that answer to whether they're going to be able to get an answer today. I'm sure they're hoping for an answer today, and I would expect there to be some type of answer today, but I couldn't tell what side that's going to fall on as of right now. It's very clear the president has a lot of power, yes, but where is the checks and balances, and where is it in this situation that the judge has to decide?
You know, Paris Schutz, our political reporter, was with me a little earlier, and we were kind of sifting through all of this information because it's so much information out there, right, Anita? And one thing that Paris saw was the president did make some remarks today, basically saying that the National Guard troops won't essentially be going anywhere, that they would stay. It sounds like his statement was no matter what the ruling is. Was that ever addressed while you were in that courtroom?
Not directly addressed, but I'll tell you this. The judge did talk about the fact that, like, if you had come to me and you had asked me, can the National Guard be used for immigration enforcement at this one facility, maybe we would have already had an answer by now. But again, it goes back into the fact that the documents don't really spell out the scope of what they're looking to do. So it's very clear that she's concerned about how limitless this particular order is, at least in its in its infancy right now. We'll see where it goes as it matures, and you know, they're working on it right now. So, but right now, where it is in the document, she's very concerned about the fact that it doesn't seem like there's any bounds, like there's any limits on this, and returning a judgment that just kind of gives carte blanche, the ability for federal troops, the National Guard, to just be anywhere at any time doing anything.
That's exactly right. That was how I interpreted what you sent us back here at the station of what the judge was asking Judge April Peary inside that courtroom. Anita Blanton, you've been excellent. Thank you so much for that wrap of what has transpired so far. We appreciate you, and I guess we'll see you back inside that courtroom. We do want to take a quick break here, and we are going to go live out to Broadview. That is where our very own Terrence Lee is. He'll have an update. We know we saw National Guard troops out there earlier. We'll touch base with him right after this break. Welcome back to Fox 32 News, Chicago Live. We are following all things in terms of this court hearing that is taking place at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. We're expecting to hear what Judge Peary decides on this, if the National Guard troops can actually be deployed here in the city of Chicago, Chicagoland area, including the suburbs. We know that they've shown up in the village of Broadview, and that is where we find our very own Terrence Lee, who's on the ground there. Terrence, can you tell me exactly what you've seen? I know you haven't been out there a very long time, but what you're seeing so far.
Hey, Tia, we've been out here for about an hour or so now, maybe a little bit more than that. Besides the occasional shout, "We don't want ICE here," and other shouts to the ICE agents that are out here. That's what we've heard so far. Of course, there's protesters here, many of them with signs. The group has grown since we've gotten here as well, but everyone, as you are back there in the newsroom, we're all waiting to hear what that judge decides, whether hundreds more troops can be deployed here to Chicago. Right now, from the numbers we know, about 45 Texas National Guard troops are here at this Beach Street ICE facility here in Broadview. Officials say they pulled up here around 1 o'clock this morning with luggage and shields. State police, state troopers, they are here on site, here to keep the peace. Those protesters that I mentioned, some of them have been out here since daybreak as well. They're sitting outside that new riot fence that we know was put up earlier. The mayor here, Broadview, calling this troop presence just a military occupation. She says it puts neighbors in danger. She doesn't want it here, Tia, but yeah, relatively quiet right now.
Earlier, Terrence, we saw some live video. We had Gabriella Primus out there for quite some time this morning, and at one point we did see those National Guard members on the rooftop kind of looking over. Wasn't a large crowd at the time there either. Are you seeing them at all out there? Are they on the rooftop still? Have you seen any action from the National Guard or even ICE agents coming in and out?
Give me 2 seconds to turn. I don't want you guys to see the back of my head, but just to look, no, I honestly do not. Besides the protesters and the state police and the police vehicles that have been out here, I have not seen anything since I've been out here. Again, only been out here for about an hour and a half or so.
You know, Terrence, one of the big
But again,
questions.
we've seen how chaotic it has been here, so I cannot stress how calm it is right now.
Calm overall, yeah, which has come into question about the National Guard being there to begin with. Have you seen any residents, because this is right dab in the middle of a residential neighborhood?
Seeing the usual traffic, I guess, going by. It's hard for me to compare it to anything because it's my first time out here, but you see every once in a while residents will stop in, take a photo of just all the media that's out here and all the cameras, some of the fencing, and then they go on about their business. But yeah, no, we've seen big trucks come through, just people going about their day to day out here in Broadview.
And the reason why I asked that question, Terrence, is because just listening and kind of knowing what's been unfolding inside of the courtroom today, you know, obviously the National Guard first being deployed here at the Broadview facility happened overnight. We saw them coming in with what appeared to be maybe some overnight bags, etc. And then we saw them there this morning. And the questions that the judge was asking inside the courtroom, basically asking, you know, is that building under siege? Are we seeing a sort of rebellion out there? So that's why I'm asking, you know, kind of what the tone and the sentiment is out there right now. Does it meet that standard of what we're hearing the defendants in this case, who's really pushing this for the National Guard to be here? Are we seeing that backed up there at the ICE facility in Broadview?
I can understand why people may feel that way after seeing the video that we saw earlier. But again, you know, I can only keep it 100 with you, and I am not getting that sense out here of anything like that. Even the word siege or any of that. A little bit much from what I'm seeing behind me, Tia.
Yeah, and I know we have seen it, you know, it escalate, tensions kind of escalate. We've seen that, you know, on Fridays, Saturdays, the weekends where it seems that more protesters are out there. Terrence Lee, thank you so much for being our eyes and ears for what is going on the ground. We thank you so much.
All right, I'll check back in if anything pops.
All right, we will check back in with you. Of course, you know, we do know everyone will go back inside that courtroom at 4:30 over at Dirksen. We are following that very closely to see what unfolds. Right after this break, I'm going to have the amazing political analyst and our political reporter as well, Pierre Schutz, with me to break down everything that we've learned so far. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Jackie.
Well, welcome back. We continue to follow breaking news of what will happen in this case of the National Guard being deployed right here in the state, in the Chicagoland area, and bringing into the conversation is our political reporter, Paris Schutz, who knows everything.
No, God.
Yeah, you do. You know a lot of things when it comes to, the legalities.
I know about this much of all there is going on right now. There's so much going on.
Let's kind of walk through, because we were together at
Yeah.
the beginning of all of this when this hearing started, roughly right after 11 o'clock this morning. The judge walked in at 11:08, and we started to get the updates coming in. What have you made of what we have heard has transpired inside that courtroom so far?
Well, and I have to credit Anita Blanton with
Yes.
sending us some great updates and text. She's been in the courtroom transcribing a lot of what the judges said, and the judge was very, very pointed in the questions that she asked. I was very struck by the pointed questions and the lack of answers from the federal government. That's pretty odd, where the defendants simply would not have a lot of answers. Like, for instance, the judge kept asking them to define what you mean by rebellion, because that's one of the instances where the president can call the National Guard. And they said, well, we don't need to define that. And the judge is like, well, I think you do.
Right.
I'm going to need to have a definition of that. It can't just mean someone not showing up for court or someone protesting. That can't possibly mean rebellion. So the lack of preparation on the part of the Trump administration, and they made their opening arguments, but then when it drilled down into questions, they didn't have a lot to say about where they would be going. The judge also said, I'm surprised. I expected that you were going to tell me that this deployment was all about guarding ICE buildings, but
Right.
you're not saying that. But you're not saying exactly what this is. And the defense saying, well, we can't predict the future. There could be a future rebellion that we can't predict.
Which is interesting, Paris,
Yeah.
because I was asking one of our legal experts that question. Can your argument be that we're doing this to essentially prepare for what could happen in the future, when the future in this case is completely unknown?
No, and the judge said very clearly, no. This is you have to define what it is that the imminent need right now is. And the judge also made some pointed comments about believing that federal agents are instigating some of this unrest, or a lot of it, even she acknowledging the danger that federal agents face right now. But she said, all public officials have threats. I got threats as the judge 10 minutes after I took this case. So this is part of our climate right now. So you can't make that argument that that's the need for the National Guard here. Just a lot of skepticism on the part of the judge. She's really doing her due diligence, clearly. And it's rare that you see a case where the defense is not prepared with a lot of answers and then expecting to win a case. And then they were even saying, it almost seems like in their latest statements, we got texts where they're asking the judge to rule on a preliminary injunction and to tailor it narrowly just to this case. The judge could do any number of things. She could rule that this is unlawful all over the country, or tailor it narrowly to this, and the defense is asking them to tailor it just to this, seeming to indicate they know that they don't have a great chance here of their argument prevailing.
I just found it very interesting when the judge was asking them about the case that we actually heard when we were in our breaking news coverage. We were hearing from the law firm that's representing, some journalists, some protesters, and even a pastor who was pelted by these pepper balls and pepper spray balls. And the defendants in this case said they had essentially no idea about any of that.
So this is a separate case going on at the building right now.
At the same time.
And a different judge ruled. This was the case of a group of journalists and activists and folks that had come together on a First Amendment lawsuit. And the judge ruled very clearly that the federal government had used excessive force against the protesters, and they couldn't do that, that it was a violation of their rights. And we'll see if the agents comply with this federal ruling, but this kind of stems from journalist Steve Held that was taken into custody, some other folks, the priest that was pelted in the head, and then the CBS 2 reporter that was shot at with chemical munitions into her car, unprovoked, allegedly. All these things the federal judge responded to, said absolutely excessive use of force on the part of the federal government. They need to act within the law.
What do you make of the fact of what Brandon Johnson had to say? I took some notes of really some of his comments, and I'll say this is a direct quote from him, saying that all of this was purely political, said that essentially the federal government, for the ICE agents, they were calling for backup, trying to use the National Guard. And he said this is a direct quote, courts may be the only check. This is out of control administration.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? And then he went down the line of, some of the instances in which he was pointing to the fact that ICE has been kind of like inflicting fear on the community. And he kind of went through some of the things that have happened.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some video circulating today purported to show ICE agents pulling a woman out of her car in traffic with kids screaming and crying around there. I saw that on another outlet. I don't know that we've verified that. But, this is a part of, I think, what the state argument has been, that the federal government is provoking a lot of unrest through actions like that. And let's remember that under Obama, he was referred to as the deporter in chief. They set a record in terms of deportations, and I don't even think the current Trump administration is on the same pace as the Obama administration was, but they did it in a different way. They conducted themselves in a different way. They knew, I think, as law enforcement, you know that if you draw attention to yourself in the way that you conduct operations like that, it can cause unrest, which is why CPD has very strict rules of engagement, use of force, de-escalation. But you're not seeing that from the federal government. And Larry Snelling, the CPD superintendent, has acknowledged they have different rules of engagement. So what you're seeing is these very public images of ICE agents pulling people out of their cars, arresting people at Millennium Park, in addition to what we believe to be our targeted enforcement of alleged criminals. But we see a lot of this, and those are the things that provoke. Those are the things that local officials said are provoking unrest that could be used then as pretext to send in the National Guard. And that's why Governor Pritzker has said all along he believes that they want to come in here and agitate so they can cause the National Guard. And the judge, her comments today, she had one comment where she seemed to indicate her belief that ICE activities themselves were provoking some of the agitation and unrest on the other side.
Yeah, she did definitely express some of that. Also in the lawsuit, I find to be interesting, well before ICE agents were on the ground here for Operation Midway Blitz, well before the National Guard showed up here, you see the plaintiffs in this case, being the state of Illinois and obviously the city of Chicago, you see them using Trump's own words that he used publicly on platforms like Truth Social and through emails that were sent out, basically saying that we will be in Chicago. Here's one that was on Truth Social. This was put on Truth Social, and it says, Chicago is the murder capital of the world. We know that isn't true.
Right.
At least statistically, not right now. That is not true.
No.
Then there was a memo that was sent out. And the subject line was, we're going into Chicago. This was September 3rd of 2025. And it says, and this, obviously some crime had happened in Chicago and the president's reacting to it. And I'm not saying when, but we're going in.
Yeah.
He's talking about.
He said it again today, whether like it or not, we're going to be there. Although, I mean, the judge might have something else to say. But these are all part of the evidence that the state is presenting. And so what you could say is Trump himself is hurting the federal government's case by making these public pronunciations about we're going and we're going to keep safety, when if the mission is tailored to protecting ICE facilities versus where we're going to go in and do law enforcement, it's a whole different thing. And that's what the judge today is expressing confusion about.
Because it is confusion. I think we can definitively say that based on our own reporting from the president's words. We heard, this was an issue of crime. Right? That's what we initially heard. And then you and I have talked about looking at the crime numbers, in Chicago, when we talk about some of the violent crime, there's still crime here, right? But when you talk about some of the violent crime, overall down 30% if you compare it to last year.
Well, and what the governor keeps saying, the mayor's saying, is that he believes this is theater to say you're going to send in the National Guard. This is red meat for the base, so to speak, because there are ways. The president commands federal agents that can come in and fight crime. ATF, FBI, Homeland Security, DEA, all those folks, there are no limits in terms of what the federal government can do in terms of putting resources in a place like Chicago. The National Guard is different. It's military, and it's not supposed to be used for civilian purposes like that. And that's what the law, Title 10, protects, and that's what's being litigated right now.
I know you talked to a lot of political figures on a state level, also federal level. We did initially see, the president pushing for the National Guard to come here based on crime, and then it kind of switched, right?
Yeah.
It kind of switched to, they need to protect ICE agents.
Right.
Have you heard from any of the political figures that I know you're constantly in contact with, why the switch? Why you bait in people supporting that, because there are a lot of people that don't understand, the full deployment of the National Guard and really what that means. Some people are under the guise that they can protect the streets. We know that's not true, but any idea of why, initially to reel it in that, they're going to be there to combat crime, and then all of a sudden the numbers come out, it proves that there's no huge crime problem, on a statistical level. There's still crime. And then now we're talking about protecting ICE agents.
Now, defenders of the president will use that to say, well, hey, it's a disaster in Chicago, and they need the help, and they failed on crime. And that might be a good point to make, but the solution, as supporters here say, is not the National Guard. That can't really help. The solution would be more resources for police officers and those other agents that we mentioned. And that's why local officials have said they do believe it's kind of a bait and switch to say, well, this is just a pretext to militarize cities, and that's what they're trying to prevent right now, is that, you let it go this far, it could go a lot further then. And then the judge. And the question that, and the defense saying, they're not even answering, though. They're acknowledging, yeah, we don't know what they'll do in the future. We don't know what the future is. Like, that's pretty clear. They're not coming out and saying, this is strictly for guarding buildings, this is strictly for immigration. They didn't say that today.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Anita was talking about some of the paperwork that the defendants in this case, they want to file. They want to put that in motion, and then they're resuming back at 4:30. What are you hearing from any lawmakers out there as this all unfolds? Have you heard from anybody?
Well, we saw Mayor Johnson out there at the federal building. Making comments about this. Governor Pritzker, I think, has weighed in today as well. Again, just saying that what they have been saying all along, they believe this is illegal. They believe the judge will rule in their favor. And we'll probably hear from Attorney General Kwame Raoul, who is the lead on this case. His attorneys are the ones arguing this in court, so we expect to hear from him once a ruling is handed down. We think around 4:30 today.
I want to ask you about this, Piers, because I know you follow all of this stuff so closely. You're really like our eyes and ears for all things, political news in the city, the state, and on a federal level. When we talk about this case, and just so we're clear for those who may not know the legalese of, some of these cases that we've talk about here on our newscast, but we talk about the plaintiffs. So we know that's the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. We talk about the defendants. So in this, the president is named, the secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, the secretary of the Department of Defense, and the secretary of the Army. Why do you think they didn't just say, President Trump or Kristi Noem? Why do you think they went after every single?
Well, because all of those folks are part of this operation. DHS, the Department of Defense, President Trump. We know President Trump, the orders are coming from the top. He's tweeting as much or truthing as much. So those are the defendants on that lawsuit. But it's the Department of Justice that's coming in, and their lawyers are the ones defending this on behalf of Trump, on behalf of the federal government, saying that the federal law does give them in an extraordinary circumstance. But they keep trying to claim there's rebellion happening, that these extraordinary circumstances are here. If you just bring up the data, crime is down, homicides are down. So it pours cold water on the notion that this is an emergency right now, because if you didn't declare 5 years ago an emergency, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, you can't really declare this legitimately as an emergency. And also, law enforcement and public safety, that is the purview of the Chicago Police Department and the Sheriff's Office and the state police and federal agents. It's not the purview of the U.S. military, but there's some, there are some military veterans that signed on to this as an amicus brief, partially because they're troubled by the direction, the comments they've heard from Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, about shifting the focus to domestic deployments. They're saying this is not what the military is here to do. Domestic law enforcement is done by domestic law enforcement agencies, not the military, and they're very concerned about a precedent changing here. So that's why they signed on to this lawsuit as well.
I know we want to go to break, but since you mentioned those crime numbers, I want to be specific because I know sometimes people are like, well, where are you guys getting this from? So
Sure.
I wanted to do
The police department.
The police department,
yeah.
and I want to bring this up just before we go to break. Looking at the numbers from 2025 versus 2024, where we are right now, homicides are down about 30 to 32% in the first half of 2025. That is compared to the same time period in the year 2024. And then shootings overall down approximately 39%. And then we talk about the other violent crimes that we've seen around our area. Carjackings, they say that's down approximately 50%. Robberies, 32% lower. And then aggravated assaults are down as well. All of this data compared to around this time last year. So that's the raw numbers that we're hearing from the Chicago Police Department.
And no one would look at those numbers and say success, victory lap,
Right.
Chicago's crime problem is solved.
No.
But it's certainly in the last 4 or 5 years shown a positive trend, as has big cities across the country. And I know criminologists are trying to study this because, you know, crime trends it's hard to pin down what causes. They tend to be cyclical. They tend to all kind of be tied to the economic conditions in the country. But what happened during COVID, obviously, was a major economic whack. Kids are home from school.
Yes.
You know, police resources are used up. So then you had this big spike, and it's steadily come down across the country. And there's some thought to some of perhaps the COVID spending, which in Chicago and other cities went to crime prevention, jobs programs, things that Mayor Johnson has talked about are essential part of crime fighting is having these resources to have opportunities for folks. And like, how many times have we heard, Tia, on stories of crime stories like, well, they turned to gangbanging, they turned to crime because they didn't have any other option. There's nothing, and that's why public officials talk about, well, you have to have opportunities, job opportunities, right, educational opportunities to try and steer folks away from that.
Especially young folks,
yeah,
before they enter a
of
life
course.
of crime.
Yeah.
Paris Schutz, it is always a pleasure.
You as well, always
to
a
break
pleasure.
all
This
of
is
this
fun.
stuff down. It really is with you. All right, stick with us. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. We got to talk about those Cubbies. For all those Cub fans out there, they survived to see another game. They defeated the Milwaukee Brewers in Game 3 of the NLDS last night. And let's bring in Chris Kay from Fox 32 Sports. They're back at it again. Chris, what are we expecting for the game?
It's hard to say because Matt Boyd's pitching today. Last time he pitched, it didn't really go so well, but he's got a full week of rest, and I think that's the kind of thing we're waiting to see. We're waiting to see how that first inning goes. The last 3 games, the first inning has been full of runs, has been full of excitement, a lot of power, a lot of explosive plays. But I think in this specific instance, it comes down to who can limit those plays in the first inning the most. And I think Matt Boyd with a full week of rest, I think is going to be an interesting part of that.
Chris, let me ask you, it's always fun when you're at home, your fans are there, they're cheering you on. A lot of times that helps keep the momentum going. How do you think home team advantage will actually help for tonight's game?
Like they said it last night, Pete Pro Armstrong talked a little bit about, hey, well, we love playing in front of these fans. We love playing in front of the Wrigley crowd specifically. I think he called them like I can't remember what bleacher creatures. That's what PCA said. He had talked a little bit about that too, and they love this crowd. They love being here. They love having the opportunity to play in front of Wrigley, and they only have one more guaranteed opportunity of that, and that's today. So they're going to relish in that for sure. I know last night it was tense, especially when I believe it was Jake Bauers hit a home run to make it 4-3. You felt the blood pressure rise a little bit in the entire part of Wrigley Field, but I think they'll feed into that for sure, and I think it's really going to help, especially with this home field advantage. So we got one last game, so we'll see if they can make it worthwhile.
I was going to ask you about that. The Cubs started off really strong last night with 4 runs in that first inning. Then what happened?
It's hard for this team to really piece together a lot of.
Are you with the Big Ten?
Yes.
Yeah, well, Masters.
You got to move.
It's
it
really
sounds
hard
like.
for this team. Yeah, I'm just gonna move over this way. Thanks.
Okay.
It's hard for this team to piece together a lot of success offensively. I think we've seen that the last couple of days. When they're able to do that, they can feed off the momentum really well. But one thing the Brewers do really well too is they can negate that momentum, and we've started to see that recently. But if they can build that momentum early and find a way to keep it going, then I think, okay, they'll have a chance. They'll have a good shot.
Are you in the media area right now? Are you in the media room?
No, I'm actually in Rosemont for the Big Ten Media Days. I'm kind of dual purpose today.
All right, you're doing everything. All right, let me ask you this. What do you think they need to improve on the most? I always say, let me ask you this, but here we are. What do they need to improve on?
It's just being consistent. It's just the consistency part of it, because they have everything they need. They have the hitting, they have the pitching. They just have to put it all together for one last game and hope they can do it again on Saturday.
Yeah, how much of a difference do you think will the pitchers actually make in terms of the game tonight?
That's what the name of the game. You got to limit teams from scoring runs and score runs on your own, and that's the first half of it all. And I think the second half of it is comes down to
Sir,
just a second, please.
you gotta go downstairs.
Second.
You guys made us, we could speak downstairs, so I guess go downstairs.
It comes down to pitching, limiting, and I think Matt Boyd, who's going to get the call today, is a good opportunity for that. But I think it's all just about momentum at that point. We've seen whoever can make the last play or make the biggest play the last couple of days for the Brewers and the Cubs, I think, has been the one that takes the win. It all comes down to playoff baseball now.
All right, I see that guy's like, all right, Chris, they're trying to move around you. Not having a lot of patience there. All right, Chris K, it's always a pleasure. We know you're doing double duty for us here today. We appreciate you giving your perspective and joining us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, stay with us. We have much more right after this break. Welcome back. Of course, you know we've been following everything that's been going on at the federal courthouse, right over at Dirksen Federal Courthouse, really waiting to see how the judge will decide on if the National Guard can be deployed in the state of Illinois by President Donald Trump. And there's another person that has been following this story closely. That is Mac Lederman of Block Club Chicago. He's been following the ICE operations in Chicago over the last month. That was brought up in the courtroom. Matt, thank you so much for your time today.
Tia, thanks for having me.
You know, there were a lot of questions from the judge, April Perry, specifically about what's happened at the Broadview ICE facility there. If it rises to the level of you know, I would say violence is essentially what she was saying. Tell us what you've seen since you've been covering ICE operations in the Chicagoland area.
Yes, that's the big question of the day, Tia, whether ICE officers need this kind of protection. They need the National Guard. That's the argument, of course, being made by the Trump administration as they push to bring the guardsmen into the city. And they're already here. We see some of them are already stationed outside the Broadview facility, which has been the sites of all these protests, which I think is really kind of the sticking point of today's trial. Many of these protests have been pushed back. The crowds have been pushed back by ICE agents firing pepper balls, chemical weapons, smoke bombs. Peaceful protesters have blocked entrances to the ICE facilities at different points in time. The situation seems to usually peak on Friday, which is coming up, and which I imagine the Trump administration would like the National Guard there for it as soon as Friday. But you know, there's real questions about who the real aggressors are here, Tia. These protesters outside the Broadview facility say it's the federal agents who are the ones that, you know, are pressing this and creating a violent situation, not the other way around. And we're starting to see a tide turn kind of in their favor, which of these decisions that are coming out of courthouses. Many charges pressed against protesters have been dropped, including one that wouldn't even be picked up by a grand jury for indictment, which is an incredibly rare thing to happen. So another win yesterday in court for people who filed a lawsuit about ICE, you know, making arrests across the city without warrants, going up and picking people up off the street, even if they weren't the target of an investigation. Whether that will affect their behavior is yet to be seen, but these court wins are coming one after another, and I think today will be the biggest decision of them all.
Mac, you said something there that I really like, and it's the aggressor word that you use there. And I think that's been really the big question, right, of what we've heard from the judge asking the question inside that courtroom, trying to nail down, you know, is there a need for the National Guard to protect ICE agents because residents are the aggressor, or are the ICE agents themselves the aggressor? You've been following this for quite some time now. Based on what you've seen, have you seen residents be extremely aggressive with ICE agents, and or have you seen ICE agents be extremely aggressive with residents?
That's the big question here, T, and I think it really just depends on who you ask. We've seen these narratives continuing to pull away from each other, the narrative from the federal side and the narrative from the people out in the streets. I could tell you what we have seen as reporters at Block Club covering neighborhoods is smoke bombs thrown in front of small crowds outside of a school in Logan Square. We've seen a Chicago alderwoman handcuffed inside a hospital after asking if they had a warrant to detain a man. We've seen, obviously, our own reporters hit by pepper balls outside the facility in Broadview. We've also seen, you know, protesters quell off these ICE agents in large crowds throwing water bottles and potentially rocks at them, and stopping them while they're trying to detain people in the street and shooing them away. I think the biggest example of this whole thing goes back to a case that we'll hear in court on Friday again, involving a woman who was shot at 5 times after she followed ICE agents while they were conducting immigration enforcement. We know that she did follow the car. We do not know who escalated the situation from there. Federal agents say that she rammed their car into them, but in court earlier this week, her lawyer said that agents rammed their car into her and shouted expletives before firing shots. So who started it? The chicken and egg here, I think, Tia, is the big question on top of everybody's mind, and we're seeing increasingly a polarized situation about where you come down on that.
Yeah, we covered that story. In fact, I did yesterday, just comparing, you know, the court document of what the the federal government is alleging in the case, looking at, the press release that they put out to the media, and then hearing what unfolded in the courtroom based on the attorney having seen the body cam video, questioning if what the federal government put out was indeed the truth. So that's something I'm sure you'll be following, and we'll be following here as well. I want to talk about two of your pieces that you put out. You put out something 3 hours ago about the National Guard being in Broadview and them expected to be at the courthouse come Friday. What have you learned about that courthouse appearance? Because it sounds like Donald Trump made some remarks earlier today, and it sounds like the plan is for them to stay no matter what this judge decides.
Well, I hadn't heard that. That's news to me, Tia, but a lot did come out of this lawsuit, which just has a very striking name attached to it. The state of Illinois versus Donald Trump. Just seeing that on paper again and again has always been really jarring to me. But a part of the courthouse documents that came out of that was a major general who was required to answer questions about what the National Guard would actually be doing. So the first point would be that they would be outside protecting the ICE facility in Broadview. We're already starting to see that happen. The second point is that ICE agents would be deployed outside the federal courthouse downtown Friday ahead of two high-profile cases that are expected to be heard there. One of them is likely to be related to a man accused of putting a $10,000 bounty on the Border Patrol commander in Chicago. The second case is a follow-up hearing for the woman shot at by ICE agents. So obviously, if you've ever been down to Federal Plaza, it's a very central point for protests, a long-standing tradition of protests. I was out there after 2020, and just it seems like stories always seem to bring you there whenever there's contention over federal actions. It always winds up right there. So setting up a really interesting situation, especially if, as you said, the National Guard comes anyway over the objections of a judge. But that would be quite the unprecedented situation if that's how it's played out. We've seen in Oregon already that the judge's blockage of the National Guard has stopped them from being deployed. So I do wonder, how much of Trump's words there are just bluster.
We'll be watching. Mac Lederman, you've been doing some great reporting over at Block Club Chicago. We thank you for taking time out of that schedule, taking time away from your journalism duties to speak with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Tia.
All right, well, stay with us right here. We'll be right back after this break. I know a lot of people don't like them, but it feels like a perfect day for a pumpkin spice latte.
What do you mean people don't like them?
Some people don't like pumpkin.
Some people don't like them. A lot of people love it.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. You do, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like anything with a caffeine content. Is
Okay,
usually
I could get
the
with
route
it.
that I go. Yes, so it's gorgeous out there today. So much sunshine. We have completely clear skies across the area, and that's going to continue through the rest of today. You'll notice here on the 7-day forecast, things look pretty good. 65 degrees out there is what we're expecting this afternoon. Right now, downtown, we're sitting at around 62, 63 degrees. And then on Friday, we're going to see increasing cloud cover. So we actually have a cold front that's going to come through tomorrow. There's a very, very small chance that we could be seeing a couple sprinkles out there on Friday, but it doesn't really look like anything that's too organized. So most of us not going to see that rain on Friday. If anything, we just see the increase in cloud. Temps look pretty good in the upper 60s. And typically for this time of the year, average highs are right around 65, 66 degrees. So we are seasonable the next couple of days around here. And then this weekend, of course, Tia, that's a really big weekend here in the city. We have the Chicago Marathon taking place. And from what I understand, runners and marathoners really enjoy 40s and 50s in the morning, and then really nothing warmer than the 60s going into the afternoon. And that's exactly what we now have in the forecast. So your weekend forecast, it has changed a little bit. We are trending a little bit cooler, but again, I think that's a good thing for a lot of folks. And we're going to keep the sunshine going too. We're going to be partly cloudy Saturday and Sunday. And then next week, that's when we start to trend a little bit warmer again. We're going to be in the 70s. And really, if you look at the Climate Prediction Center's outlook here, all the way through about the 20th, 21st of October, which of course is taking us through the next couple of weeks, it's still trending warmer than average. So things are looking pretty good for us across the region if you like the warmth. But something to keep in mind is that warmer than average, those average highs, Tia, they keep ticking downward. Every about 2 days or so, we're shaving another degree off of that average high. So even though those maps, when you see them, they look like, okay, it's going to be really warm, all that means is that we're going to be warmer than the average for those dates, which by the time we get to mid to late October, that's putting us in the lower 60s. So anything higher than that, you know, we're doing all right.
I'm starting to feel like we're plunging slowly but
we
surely
are.
into winter. That's
Slowly
what it sounds
but
like.
surely.
Well, stay with us. Of course, we are following also what's going on over at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. We are following to see how that judge is going to rule about the National Guard being deployed right here to our state. We'll have that for you on Fox 32 News at 4. We'll see you then.
Powers to deploy the military to quell domestic rebellion. Now, the lack of defining terms, the absence of real accountability, the vagueness of that statute are the reason why we now need reform. Limits were imposed, but the limits are filled with loopholes, practical gaps that fail to check the president's power. The problems the act was designed to address are no longer commensurate with the dangers it now is creating. I reintroduce this legislation for this Congress, and I thank my colleagues for supporting this effort. The President's actions over the last 8 months demonstrate the need for these urgent reforms and increased congressional oversight. Earlier this week, the President suggested he would invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy more guardsmen in major cities if the courts or governors delayed deployments. So I stand here with my colleagues from Oregon, Illinois, and California whose constituents are living through this threat. It is now a reality as much as a threat. I warned this body 2 years ago of this reality. Unchecked power deployed unconsciously. And I should say that this kind of use of the military poses a tremendous threat to all of our civil liberties, even if we are not from California